Hello, welcome to our live Liberty Alert. I'm Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty, and I'm so glad that you're here with us today. Our title for today's program was going to be Supreme Court Nominees, Should Religion Be the Issue? And we will talk about some of that today, but we've got some compelling things that have happened in the last week that I think we do need to talk about again. I wish we didn't, but I think we do need to address those since they are very, very compelling, especially to churches and especially to people of faith. So the questions we were going to answer, and if we get to those, we will, would have been, can you be a good Supreme Court justice if you don't believe that there are fundamental truths to the world in which we live? And that really is the issue. So when they talk about our faith being kind of in the way, or our moral worldview being something that is problematic, what about their moral worldview? And can they even defend their moral worldview? Or is it just an arbitrary thing, whoever's in charge at the moment? And if you follow secularist thought, that's real. There are no moral truths. Well, how can you be a judge if there's no moral truths to anything? Can you adjudicate the law properly if you don't feel compelled by that? If judges can legislate, and that's where a lot of the people today are saying, well, the Supreme Court should just kind of make up the rules because the times are changing. Well, then why can't we change them back? Why is it that once they rule on something, if legislating your conscience or legislating your particular moral worldview or your own political worldview, if that's what a judge is supposed to do, why can't we legislate the other way? Why is suddenly the law set in stone after a certain group of people legislates it so? Well, you know our position. They shouldn't be legislating in the first place. They should be adjudicating. And if they do legislate, that should be overturned because they overstepped their bounds. And then finally, I was going to ask today, isn't the Christian worldview the best worldview to deal with these kinds of entanglements? So we're going to try to get to some of that. I know I've got an article where Amy Coney Barrett actually responds to some of these things herself, and I'll try to make sure you have a copy of that either today or for next week. So again, we have information that you should take into account so that you can deal with those questions when they come up in your conversation. Thanks again for tuning in. Please keep this Liberty Alert at the forefront. Share it with your friends. I love that you're joining in with me today. This conversation that we have has been a real blessing. Keep sharing our website, lcrlfreedom.org, because we can only continue to do this kind of work with you on board. I always tell people when I go visit a senator, a congressman, when I'm participating in a group, I tell them that I represent our church, 2.2 million strong, our schools, 22,000 schools, our universities, and our 6,000 pastors and well over 10,000 teachers. And then I represent the people who follow us in our work in D.C., and that speaks to them, okay? They respond to constituents, not to individuals so much. And so, or money. But we don't bring that to the place. We bring our presence and our values. And so thanks for being a part of this again with us. Now, again, for those of you listening, maybe the first time you've ever tuned in, we have kind of a way of dealing with some of these things. Here's some thoughts that we always have in every program. We don't believe the government can save us. It's God's emergency organization because of sin, and it does have a limited role in our lives. Family is more important than government. A church is more important than government, but government has a role, and we tend to think of it as being more important because it enforces its role. We do need more citizenship. And what I mean by that is apolitical, partnering with our friends and neighbors to solve our own problems. We need a lot more of that. We don't need to politicize everything. And if you do trust in princes, the Bible says, you will be disappointed. So again, good government can't save us. They can't solve the big problems of our lives, but bad government can really destroy. And so we want the best government we can vote for and we can have, but we want it to be limited in its role in the big questions of our life. Now, after the end of the program, you can go to our website again, and I do have a voter guide. Fred Hintz, he works in the Minnesota district of our Lutheran Church, and he kind of does in the state of Minnesota what I try to do nationally for all of us. And Fred's people have put together a voter guide that kind of puts together some of the major issues we as Christians should be very concerned about in this coming election. It's really pretty well done. So way to go, Fred. Way to go, folks in Minnesota. And a lot of what he's talking about applies nationally as well as in particular states. So we're going to post that up for you on our website. And I think you will be, again, pleased with the kind of information that it presents and the framework within which it presents that information. And it should be helpful to you in exercising your right of franchise called the vote. All right, the week in review. And I got to be honest with you, I was all prepared for our work to talk about the Supreme Court, to talk about Judge Barrett, to talk about all these kind of things. And two issues are hitting right now that are really confounding the church again. And they're putting pastors and people in very difficult situations, and we need to speak about those things. The first one is we need to talk about COVID-19 again. And it's driving me crazy that this disease, this pandemic is being politicized to such a degree that the fear is what is now at work in our culture. The science is not at work in our culture. I know the science, you know the science, or you should know the science by now. That is not the issue. It's the fear of what might be, and the kind of things that are being said are so outrageous today. But it is causing people to be afraid. Yes, people have died from this. But when you look at the dynamic of the way this thing was presented to us way back when, in the early part of this year, it's nothing compared to what was said. We were looking at millions and millions of deaths, and we didn't know where this virus came from. Well, the science has taught us how to deal with this, and now we have to deal with the risks of living life in the face of this. And we're being told we can't live our life in the face of this until it's eradicated. It's crazy. But that's what's happening. And the reason why I say it's crazy is because Governor Cuomo now has threatened the church in New York. California is reducing churches' openings again, and it's saying you cannot have worship, you cannot do certain things. Virginia, Wisconsin, I've even gotten a letter from a friend of mine who says they're now down to 25%. And Michigan, I think, is doing some things again, and it's specifically targeting the church and making people afraid. And I've seen this happen in our churches, and I just spoke to a lot of pastors in Iowa, and it's wreaking havoc in the churches because it's starting to create people kind of turning on each other. Some people think if you go to church in person, somehow you're writing the death sentence for people. And then other people are cavalier and don't take any of this seriously at all. Well, that's not who we are. We've assessed the risk, we've assessed the science, and now we've talked about how we can move forward. Well, we're revisiting all that because the governors are shutting people down, and they're targeting the churches. I thought we had come to realize that this virus is not as deadly as we thought it was. It is a real risk. There's no doubt about that. But it's one risk of many that we face every day as we go about our lives living it. It's most certainly deadly, more deadly to those of us over 60, over 70, or over 80. And usually, again, we got to have other issues that we're struggling with. But even for those folks who are older, if you're in relatively good health, it's not that much of a risk. I think the survival rate is 96%, and that's with no help from medication. We now have therapeutics, medicines that are helping mitigate the disease. We do not have a vaccine. We may never have a vaccine. AIDS is now been eradicated by therapeutics. There's no vaccine for AIDS, but it's been eradicated by therapeutics, and we have some therapeutics now that are helping tremendously. So again, we're dealing with this stuff, and we're treating it like it's the bubonic plague, and we have no ability to handle it. And it's not that. So the shutdowns are being ordered around the country again, and this lockdown fear is being again hoisted on the American people. There's no science for it. If I hear a politician say follow the science one more time, they're following the fear of what the science may be saying, and it's just crazy because we know what the science is telling us now. We know what this disease is like. We haven't found a way to eradicate it yet, but it may be herd immunity that finally is the only way that this is eradicated. Most diseases, you get a spike in everyone getting sick, and that's when herd immunity develops and then begins to push back on the virus. Some people are arguing that if we actually go to this lockdown, we're going to create a longer infection time, and we're going to have more people dying about it because we're not letting the virus be attacked by our natural immune system. That's a scientific discussion there too, and no one's talking about that. But again, this fear, I think I can say this pretty matter-of-factly, this fear is political. And we should take this virus seriously. I think anyone who follows this program knows that we wear masks when we're with folks. We practice social distancing. We practice good hygiene. But it's crazy to start saying you have to wear masks when you're by yourself in your car. It's crazy to say if you have to wear masks when you're out by yourself in the middle of the country, in the middle of the open air. That's just a fear-mongering. And we're hearing people say you have to wear masks all the time. Wow. So how do we kind of deal with this again now? And for you, those of you who are pastors who are struggling with the fear that you have in your congregation, this is tough. I'm going to try to give you some facts. I'm going to try to give you some things that are true, but then there still is the pastoral application to this. You know, how do we apply this to our people, and how do we promote this as we also think about how the outside world thinks about these things? And those are hard things to completely manage, but we should be forthright and open about what we're doing. There is a risk of living life in a world full of sickness, death, violence, poverty, and of course, success and blessing. There's risks in all of that. And so the people that are saying we're not going to start living again until this risk is totally eradicated, that is irrational. And again, we can't live that way. And if we live that way, we actually create death from other aspects. We create a death because of locking people down. We create a death from loneliness. We create death from fear. We create all kinds of death from other aspects too. So it's not like we suddenly have eradicated one thing and solved all of our problems. We've just created a new set of problems. Assessing the risk then is what we need to do, and we cannot give in to fear. We cannot give in to fear. There is going to come a point where some churches may have to stand up against to these governors, and the way we did before, like in Minnesota, when the district presidents wrote the letters and said, we've assessed the science, we've assessed the risk, we're following the rules, and we don't see that there's any reason why we should be locked down. And so therefore, since we have a First Amendment right, not only to religious liberty, but to religious assembly, we are asserting that because religion and faith is essential to the American experiment. If the secularists can wipe away religion from our culture, the freedoms that we have will be wiped away too. You heard it here. I know other people are saying that, but it's true. Okay? So assess the risk, but don't give in to fear. One of the ways I've seen that done, by the way, I'm starting to get out and speak to a lot of you again in person, which is a blessing to me. But we also are speaking digitally. We're still doing our Champions for Liberty events both online as well as in person. So if you want to have a Champions for Liberty event at your church, we can do it live, I think, if you're open to that, or we can do it online as well. I just spoke in person over the weekend to the Pastors Conference in Iowa, but I also was, I'm going to be doing online at St. Paul de Pere. And I'm going to be doing their Theological Institute, and we're talking about these same things. So we can come meet you where you are, and we can bless you with the information that we have. Just tell us how we can be of service. So assess the risk. Do not give in to the fear. And one of the ways then I've seen by some of you who did this was in Indiana, I thought this was phenomenal what they did. They had an event in the open air. They practiced social distancing. They also webcast it, so those who were really still afraid or those who really were at tremendous risk, they didn't have to physically come. But a lot of people still wanted to come. So what they did was they said, here's how we're going to do it. Outside, or at least in a covered outside area, or practicing whatever rules or the like inside. And then they had each person wear a different wristband, assessing kind of how you felt about this public participation. And what I liked about that was when you came in, they said, red, that means you want to be here, but you're still really kind of nervous about this stuff. So please, just give us our distance. We want to hear it face to face. We want to be here. We want to let people know we're okay, but we really can't handle people coming up to us, or we can't handle even the 6-foot contact. So please just let us be. We're thankful to be here. Then there was yellow. Yellow was the 6-foot. That really matters, and we maybe even a little bit beyond. We can talk and look forward to greeting and everything, but we're a little bit skittish about it. But you can approach us. We're not totally enamored by this or totally afraid of this thing. We've assessed the risk, and this is where we feel like we can engage. And then finally there was green. You still actually practice in general the social distancing, but occasionally you might come up and give what they call the elbow bump or whatever, and you could have a conversation with folks. You did wear a mask. In this case, since that was kind of the rules of the community, we still did that. But in some communities, they're even talking about, there's going to come a point where we may take the mask off as long as we have the freedom to do that. I thought that was excellent. I thought you could even do that at church, just get a bunch of that stuff, or have people put those colors on their wrist, and then it allows you to kind of assess the risk of people without treating everyone as if we're terrified. When I was in D.C. a few weeks back, it still just drove me crazy. I'm walking outside with a mask on, and as I'm walking down the street, and I'm giving wide berth to anybody coming on my way, this young lady was walking towards me, and she saw me, and she immediately ran across the other side of the street, as if we were both carrying like the plague. Where did that fear come from? Because it's not driven by the science. It's driven by politics. And so we're going to have to deal with this. And I'm saying we've got to start saying, no more of this. We're not treating this with that kind of fear. The Bible says that Jesus tells us, don't fear those who can kill the body. Fear the one that can kill the soul. But then he also tells us, but don't fear at all, because I have overcome the world. And so to that degree, we're going to find a way to live lives of freedom in this world, honoring God, serving neighbor, but we're not going to be afraid. And we're sure not going to have some governor tell us how we're going to actually finally assemble for the things that do matter. Like I said, I am careful about proclamations from on high, because you have to then pastorally apply these things. I've been fighting in D.C. I've signed letters to representatives. I've sent a letter to every representative leader in the House, the Senate, and to the DOJ, and also to the White House, talking about how the church is an essential element and pastors are essential workers in our culture. They are not second-class citizens. They're not non-essential elements, because I've even argued with parishioners that the last voice you want to hear in the hospital room, if you really are gravely ill from COVID, the last voice you want is some secular doctor saying, turn off the machine, and that's that. We as Christians have another word right at that moment that says, God is not done and you are not left up to your own devices, because no Christian ever dies alone. They die because Christ is there right with them, and he ushers them into his bosom and into the eternal life that he has for us. And we as pastors have been at the bedside of gravely ill people before, telling them that even as they close their eyes in death. And that's essential. That's more essential than what that doctor can do, because that doctor can just fix you for a time. This can fix you for eternity. But having said that, and having argued that, I'm also aware of the fact that there's real fears out there. There may be some pastors who are very afraid of this, because they actually, if they contracted it, could take their life. And so I don't say that there's a one-size-fits-all way of pastorally applying these truths. But we're going to fight for the fact that the church is essential, pastors are essential, that this disease is something that we will overcome, and even if we have to live amidst it for the rest of our life, we will learn how to assess it and mitigate its fears and go about our lives. So there's a pastoral application to all these things. If you're a parishioner listening in, don't just say, go to your pastor and say, Pastor Seltz said this is what we're supposed to do. No, go talk to your pastor. let the leadership of your church kind of come up with your protocols, because if you do something in certain states today, the very governor himself may be coming after you, so you need to be prepared for that. Talk to your circuit counselor, talk to your district president, make sure you kind of know where they stand and you stand, so that when you start to do the things you think are correct, even starting to maybe visit people. You know, if you visit people in nursing homes, or if you visit people in their homes who are shut-ins, all these things need protocols, and decide what you're going to do by assessing the risk, but not giving in to the fear. Like I said, a buddy of mine, his name is Brian Solomon, and he sent me this. It was a letter from C.S. Lewis, and he's trying to share this with his people. So I'm just going to read it. It's a little bit long-winded, but and I'll post it for you too, but I loved it. And this was at a time when the atomic bomb was a real threat to society. And so to apply this to today, just put the words COVID-19 or Wuhan virus, or whatever you want to call it, put that in place of the atomic bomb. In one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb or COVID-19. How are we to live in the atomic age? I'm tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year. Or how you'd have lived in the Viking Age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat at night. Or indeed, as you're already living in an age of cancer, syphilis, paralysis, air raids, and the age of railway accidents and motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love are already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was even invented. And quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. We had indeed one very great advantage over our ancestors: anesthetics. But we have that still. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of a painful and premature death to a world which is already bristled with such chances, and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we're going to be destroyed by one atomic bomb, and remember, put COVID-19 in there to make it applicable today, let that bomb come when it comes. Find us doing sensible and human things. Find us praying and working and teaching and reading and listening to music and bathing the children and playing tennis and chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking only about bombs. They may break our bodies, and a microbe can even do that, but they need not dominate our minds. I think that's good words. I'll have that posted for you. Those words are just as applicable today. I was just thinking, stressing that Christ has overcome the world, reviving the we have nothing to fear but fear itself notion, keep calm and pray on. And then it sounded ridiculous when I realized that was them saying those words in the middle of real possibility of death every day from World War II, from bombs, from air raids and all that. And we're comparing COVID-19 to that? We've got to get some perspective on this, and I think C.S. Lewis's letter at least helps us. Go about your business, assess the risks, do not give in to the fear, and I pray that you are blessed as you do. The other thing that I would say, and we talked about this last time, is I'm really worried about the weaponization of things like this. And if we start giving in to the weaponization of this, weaponization of fear, weaponization of illness, I can see the weaponization of global climate change. I can see that as the next thing. I can see, it's almost like in Luther's day, there's always something that the higher-ups came up with to make people feel guilty. And there was always one reason, one way for them to actually assuage their guilt, and it was to give in to the powers that be. I find it always kind of funny that the solution to all the things that we're being told is always to give them more money, give them more of our liberty, give them more control of our lives, and then they say they're gonna take care of these things. That's crazy. So again, in summary, this is a highly contagious but not deadly disease in general. Sweden is proving that they have never locked down. And they've let the virus hit, and now they're actually finding out that there's not that their herd immunity is developing, and it's actually pushing back and causing them to be able to go about their business. Again, children are not really vulnerable to this disease the way we older people are. So let's protect those of us who are in that older category, but let's try to go about our business everywhere else. And again, I'm just saying, if you give into these new fear protocols, I'm telling you these folks will come up with new fear protocols after this one's gone. And so now's the time to say, wait a minute, is this how we want to live? And I think the answer to that, even for fair-minded people who disagree with us on a lot of other issues, they would say, we don't want to live this way. And I think that would make sense. So contend for liberty, share your faith without fear. The second thing, and this is something, again, I've been kind of warning about, I've been talking about it, but a lot of people still think of this threat as something that is probably not going to happen. There's a lot of people who believe that if the vote just goes one way or the other this time, it'll just be like it's always been, and one side will have their time, the next side will have its time. But there are, I call it, two icebergs hitting. This is a worldview election unlike one we've ever had before, because both sides are aligned to a worldview very, very matter-of-factly. And we've got to ask ourselves, which one do we want to be aligned with? And so it just troubled me to find out that there's one state that's already doing what I know will happen if the politics goes a different direction from a federal point of view. Virginia, which kind of overnight went secular, I call it progressive or secular pietistic or secular puritanical. That's kind of how I describe this movement. And so they just had a slew of legislation that they just rammed through, because they basically, one side owns all the legislative process and the other side can't stop it. And it seems to me that, one of the things I'll say to those of you who are always talking about both sides of the aisle, there are some states where the other party has literally no chance in the debate. There are some schools where there's literally only one political view that is being espoused in the school. I find that troubling, but no one ever seems to find that problem a real problem. So Virginia went this one way, and you don't see, and the cities are basically one political entity. I would love to see debate. I'd love to see dialogue. You're not seeing that in these places. But here's what's coming in a lot of those places. Ready? This one's called the so-called Virginia Values Act. See, it sounds so nice. What could be wrong with that? Well, it basically, and this happened on, they passed this Easter Saturday. And so again, some of this state stuff doesn't hit me until after it's now being litigated. And so in the middle of the pandemic, they were compelling churches, religious schools, and Christian ministries to hire people who did not share their stated beliefs on marriage, sexuality, and gender identity. They were also demanding that the church change their teachings on these issues as well. And a companion law required ministries and others to pay for transgender surgery in their employee health care plans, even if it violates their convictions. It's already here. It's already here. If you're sued, and you will be, because people will start targeting churches and schools, every violation, per violation, it's $100,000 right off the bat, and it's unlimited damages. And it's being done by the government to the churches. I'm so sick and tired of hearing, I read another person today said, if tyranny comes to America, it's going to come through the churches. Baloney! It's already here, and it's coming to the churches. The violence is already here, and it's not coming from the churches. It's being done to law-abiding citizens who just want to live in peace with other people. The intimidation's already here. And it's amazing to me. A state like Virginia is already setting the churches on notice. So again, when you think, basically we're being told sexual orientation, gender identity, and if you are a person who believes that, God be with you, but you don't have the right to hoist that on those of us who do realize that biological sex defines who we are as people, and our identity in that reality has to take that into account. God made us male and female. And all of us struggle with how we relate to that because of our own sinfulness, our own compulsions, our own lusts. We all have struggles with this. So we're with you on this. And finally, we hope that you'd find your identity not in your sexual practice or your sexual proclivities, but in your identity with the God who created you and redeemed you, just like He did to us. So we're not talking from a holier-than-thou position. We're talking from the same broken position as all of you are, but we're talking about a God who created, ordered, and redeemed the world. You can't have that idea anymore. Even though it's foundational to our documents, we believe that because we're created by God and we bear His image, we have unalienable rights. That whole perspective is being swept away in our country as if it doesn't matter. It's incredible to me that we don't have even churches fighting back, because we're going to lose liberties and we're going to see punitive things that we've never seen before in our culture. And we're going to be giving up liberty. Even the liberty for those with whom we disagree, they're going to lose it too. Government now forces your compliance on people whose free choices are being made, but if it's against the government dictates for your group, out you go. And because they no longer accept any dissent, there's no dialogue in this. People keep saying, we need a dialogue. There is no dialogue. You will be told to be quiet, and if you dialogue any other way than the company line, there's punitive damages. It's already here. Alliance Defending Freedom is pushing back because they know churches are now going to be prosecuted for their traditional, moral, biblical beliefs. And it does not matter that Christians, Muslims, Jews, secular people even, and other folks have some of these same moral beliefs. It's not just confined to the Judeo-Christian worldview. Doesn't matter. If you have that view, we're now going to legislate it out of existence. We were all concerned about, Obergefell and the gay marriage debate. By the way, for those of you who don't know, in California, they passed the Defense of Marriage Act, and it was passed by 75% of the voters who voted for traditional marriage were African American and Hispanic. It was the liberal white people who voted against traditional marriage, but they were defeated. California passed a law to protect the institutional nature of marriage, because there is something unique about the institutional nature of marriage. A man, a woman, and a child. It's foundational to society. No matter what all those other relationships are, this one is different. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals disenfranchised black voters unlike any other time in history. How come you don't hear about that in the news? So again, you will be prosecuted, and we've talked about this. This is the moment where religious liberty is the issue. It's already the issue in Virginia. They didn't heed that, and they elected a group of people who came in and said, we believe in this, and now they're actually legislating the opposing perspective out of business. This is going to impact churches, schools, preschools, universities. It's going to adoption agencies, homeless shelters. It's going to impact all of that stuff. Any that have a traditional Christian moral motivation. And by the way, Christians do a whole lot of good work for people and very seldom get paid for it. There's lots and lots of volunteers that are doing all this kind of work, and they'll be actually iced out of the whole equation too. So, I guess I want to share this with you again before we get to the whole thing about Judge Barrett's faith and its impact on her rulings and stuff like that. We got to understand again what's happening at this moment in history. Around the country, we're seeing these two worldviews collide, and one is enforcing itself on the other. I've said to Christians around the country, we're the live and let live people now, which is kind of strange because usually people thought of our church, because it's conservative, as kind of like a stuffy church, and we try to tell people how to live and how not to live. In reality, we try to be faithful to what God says. So if God says no to something, we say no, and including no to ourselves. We don't always heed God's word like other people don't either. I mean, we struggle with this too. We're sinners too, but we proclaim His word, His no, and we proclaim His yes on His terms for all people. we're now the ones saying, if you disagree with us, God bless you, we'll try to love you to see this, we'll try to serve you so that you can see this, because this is who God is for you. And we're the ones being told, you can't do that. We're not telling other people they can't live their lives that way. We're being told we can't have our perspective. That should frighten those of you, well, that's not the right word, because we're not going to live by fear. I told you that. That should concern you, though, because basically it's going to take the church's public voice away from it in a country that said the church's public voice was essential to liberty. Well, I'm saying it's essential to the eternal liberty of people. And if we allow people to shut us out of the public square, shut us out of even being able to be public Christians, it's going to be harder and harder to share the good news, even with our neighbor. I just don't know why we would let that happen if we have First Amendment protections and First Amendment responsibilities to the contrary. So again, right now, to try to give you an idea, because I've seen this now for the last 3 years. One side is weaponizing politics in virtually every aspect of life, trying to eradicate any dissent from their perspective. And so there's two groups. And all I'm telling you, I'm not telling you to vote for, but here's the two groups. Look at their platforms, judge them not by what they say, but by what they do and what they're already doing. Okay? Judge it that way. One group, and I call them the secular Puritans, it's a group of people who say that the government has a solution for every one of your problems. And if you believe that and vote for them, they will make these problems go away. I think that's a fair thing to say. That's what they're saying. With technology, with money, and if we can get everybody on the same page and have the right structures, we're going to solve all these problems. I've read their quotes. I've read them in their own words, and I think that's exactly what they're saying. But these are people who've never solved any of these big problems. They have never solved any of these. They have no track record of overcoming any of these. And the solution always amounts to give them more money, give them more and more of your control of your life, and give them more, and allow them to limit your freedoms more and more and more and more. When the mayor of New York, not the one that's in there now, but even one before, when he said, I'm going to limit what soft drinks you can drink in our city, I don't understand why New Yorkers put up with that. And by the way, all it did is made soft drinks, which generally speaking, those of us who don't necessarily take our health as seriously as we should, and the poor can actually be put in that category, they're the ones drinking the soft drinks. Okay, they're not the ones drinking the highfalutin, waters and stuff that are being produced that cost $3, $4, $5 a bottle. Now it costs them twice as much because they can only buy it in whatever 12-ounce, either cans or 12-ounce glasses. Instead of buying the big gulp for 99 cents, they had to buy two of them. And so it just increased the amount of money that people who didn't have money to spend, spent. But that's because of an edict from a mayor who said, I can control your lives and I will do better for you than you can do for yourself. I just don't understand why people would want to let one person dictate those levels of discussions and decisions for them. So again, in the end, they're saying, we're going to control all of this. In fact, in California, it just reminded me, even if you smoked a cigar in the backyard of your house and the smoke wafted over to the neighbor's backyard, you could get cited for that. I remember that one. That was crazy. But they promise it will all be worth it in the end, and anyone who disagrees, that's where the names come out. Fascist, racist, Neanderthal, backwards, Luddite, whatever. I think that's a fair assessment of the view that says government will solve all these problems. The second one is, the other vision is one where you have more control of your life, the government has less, but it means that you have to strive for it, you have to work hard for it, and you control the destiny as much as you're able of your family, your work, your life. And for, of course, Christians, we know how God is involved in that whole process. He's really the one at work in our lives. But we strive to give Him glory as we strive for excellence in His name, and we strive to serve our neighbor with excellence in His name as well. That is a much more messy way of living. That was one where we have to take responsibility for what we're doing, and that's where one sets freedom it protects freedom so that you can strive for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness with a virtuous life for others. So again, we see that government has a role in that, but it's limited. It's supposed to set the guidelines, make sure people have equal access to some of these opportunities, but we're always afraid of them, getting into the business where they don't belong. Those are the two groups that are in our culture today. Those are the two groups, and they tend to align now in particular platforms. Look at the platforms, judge them for yourself, and ask them which one is going to be best for you as a Christian, best for the work that you have to do as a Christian in this world, best for your business, best in going forward so you can be whoever God wants you to be for the sake of your family and your neighbor. I wish there wasn't as definitive, I wish there was more interplay between these things. But if you look at Virginia and you look at exactly what happened immediately after the election, the Equality Act is the federal version of the Virginia Values Act. It's already been passed in the House, and if the politics changes over the course of this next election, that will become not just the law of Virginia, that will become the law of the land. So, I just say to you again, what's the church in the midst of all this? I do think the church is an obstacle. And I do think we can't, this is a time not to be defensive. Yes, people can say, well, this is terrible, Pastor. What do we do? The answer is don't be defensive. Still try to say, how is God's moral voice in the world the answer to these questions? How is honor your father and your mother the answer to these questions? Thou shalt not murder, innocent life. How is that the answer? How is the fidelity of the institution of marriage the answer to these things? And why is it the right thing for all of us, in spite of the fact that there are going to be people who disagree with that? We need to keep that voice in the public square for the sake of the culture, and obviously as a pre-evangelism voice for the sake of the gospel. But as we talk these things through, I'm telling you, for the secular Puritans who've already defined the battle lines, remember Robert Reich's statement. Robert Reich thinks the church is in the way, and it needs to be. Remember, he said, terrorism will disrupt us, but it's not the biggest danger we face. And he meant the biggest danger was the traditional church. So I think now's the time. It's an Esther moment in our history. It's a moment like in Rome remember when Caesar decided he was going to make Christians bow down? If you just said, I denounce Christ, then you got to live. If you didn't, you were suddenly, there was punitive reaction to that. Well, I think we're at that Caesar moment. It's a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego moment. It's also a moment, like in Daniel. We're trying to be faithful to the things that God has given us. And in America, Christianity had some say it was a favored station in life. I said, no, it undergirded the liberties of so much of what we have. So its principles really even bless those who didn't necessarily buy into the Christian ultimate message of Jesus as Savior. Why would we, if we know that it's given us these blessings, why would we not fight for it at this moment in time? So the church may be an obstacle, but the more of an obstacle we are, the more of an opportunity we have to be God's unique people with His unique voice, not just to us, but even to those with whom we disagree. I didn't get to Amy Barrett, so I will post her response. Here's an article that says, Amy Coney Barrett gives a perfect response to anti-religious bigotry. When they say a Christian can't be a judge, she has a great response. And the response in summary is this. She said, my faith doesn't dictate what I do as a judge. The law does. But so also should she says, whether you're secular or non-secular, everybody has a moral understanding. She said, your moral perspective may not jive with the law of the land at that moment, but you're called to litigate according to the law of the land. The only thing that can check that is the Constitution. And we'll talk a little bit about just because something becomes constitutional doesn't mean, Dred Scott was for a moment constitutional, but it violated the basics of the Constitution, and it was eventually overturned for good reason. So we'll talk about those dynamics in the week to come. But she has a great response even to that challenge. I would ask you to go ahead and read that for yourself. And folks, some of you are giving me some great ideas for programs, and I'm gonna address these. Lorraine said, about the same thing about the nominee of the Supreme Court. She's talking about overturning Roe v. Wade. Well, if it's established law, isn't that the wrong thing to do if it's the established law? And so just like I just talked about, we will focus on that in one program. And then, Jerry, you sent this in. We're going to have a program on this too. It's about critical race theory and what it really is. And what it's really trying to accomplish, and why we Christians need to be really aware of this stuff. It sounds like it's doing one thing, but it's doing something radically different than you can imagine. And we need to actually learn how to stand up to these movements. There's another movement called liberation theology. It sounds so wonderful until you understand it makes the blessings of Jesus political and basically steals what the cross can only deliver. And it also doesn't deliver freedom to anybody, because it just makes the government in control of everything, which winds up meaning that government elites have a lot of power and a lot of blessings, and the rest of us are put in secondary position. We'll talk about that. So we're going to have a program where we talk about critical race theory. We'll have a program that's going to talk more about Judge Barrett, her confirmation process, and how we should be thinking through some of these issues about when the Supreme Court says something. Are they the last voice on these issues? Can they overstep their boundaries? If they're not supposed to legislate from the bench, then what do we do if they do? And so we'll talk a little bit about that in the weeks to come. So thank you for those suggestions. We will be dealing with those in programs in the future. So thanks for the email. Thanks for sharing this with folks. Keep praying. What do I always say? God is at work in the world, so you don't have to despair. Remember, the Bible even says when there be wars and rumors of wars and it looks like all hell is breaking loose in the world, that's when Christians look up, because their salvation, the second coming of Christ, is nearer now than when they first believed. So we have a perspective on this, and we should never do anything out of fear, but we should always assess the risks of doing things in the world and make sure that we're not doing things foolishly. And of course, make sure we're doing things that actually can serve the neighbor so that they might know the love of Jesus for themselves too. Till next time, speak the truth in love with humility and grace. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Until next time, God richly bless you. Have a great day.